was during the Depression, the 1929 stock market crash, where the banks failed and people were moved out of their homes. They couldn't get their money because the banks had failed, and they were given a few weeks to move out. And about 15 million people were sleeping in every empty lot. That was the time that I heard new ideas, like Mankind United, socialism, communism, fascism, and I was listening to all the different speakers. And none of them seemed to have a description of just how to get to a better world. They all criticized the country, the banks, the money people, but they didn't offer an alternative. The communists and the socialists talked about an alternative. Of course, there were so many problems trying to get a job that I hitchhiked to California because airplanes dropped pamphlets. They said, come to California, a lot of jobs. When I got there, there weren't a lot of jobs. It was just a gimmick to get people to California to work for less. I went to an aircraft factory at the time, and I submitted my drawings, and I got a job. My job was to think up new ideas, just that. And so I worked there for a while, and everything I thought of belonged to the Northrop Division of Douglas. Everything I thought of belonged to them. They took out patents on certain things. I don't know what they did with them. After the aircraft factory, I worked for different companies, industrial design, designing products. Following that, I met a man who was a pilot in World War I. He told me he was ordered not to bomb German munition dumps. He said he flew over it many times with orders not to bomb it. He couldn't understand that. After the war, he found out that Fortune magazine ran an article called Arms and the Men, and that explained how DuPont had holdings in the German company called I.J. Farben. So he was ordered not to bomb it. Then he was very disappointed in the government for being that corrupt. He told me he was a member of technocracy. I went to their meetings and I liked what they had to say, what I heard of it, and I joined. Then I asked Howard Scott, who was the director of the meeting. I said, how come there's no blacks in the meeting? He said, let them start their own section. That bothered me. On the application, it had race. That bothered me. Then later on, I asked him, how come there was no Orientals? He said, the Oriental mind can't understand technology. They can't grasp it. I tried to reason with him. Didn't work at all. At headquarters, technology headquarters, there was a sign above the door, all is conditioning. Apparently they didn't know what it meant. And so I resigned from the organization because I could not defend that racial stuff. Other than that, I liked what they had to say, and I made a lot of suggestions. They picked up some of them, did not pick up others. The things they picked up was the continental hydrology and total conscription. In times of war, to conscript men, machines, material, and money, so no one makes profit in war. Then I left that organization and tried to design an organization of my own. When I got through, I had on paper what I thought was a good idea. But then I asked myself, how do you know it'll work? So I said, I didn't know whether it'll work. That was the time I joined the Ku Klux Klan, to see if I can turn them around. I did, but it took me a month and a half. Then I joined the White Citizens Council to see if I could turn them around. That took me about a month. I turned them around, dissolved it. Then I asked other questions in New York about the most backward people. And it wasn't the most backward people, but a certain group of Arabs believed the earth was flat. I turned them around in about 2.5 hours to teach them that it was round. I showed them the evidence. The way I turn them around has lots of little different bits. If you want to go into that, I will. If you don't, I'll move on from there. Do you want to go into how I turn them around?
Is it the story with the balloon, or is there
Yes.
more?
The balloon.
Okay, I think we
what
have
I said,
They have that, they think, already on tape. Do you want,
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
do you,
then
do you want to
I-
go, I'm sorry,
Sorry.
I was just, do you want to go into his childhood? You have this,
Would be great, yes, if
can
there
you
are
start
any
at your
formal.
early childhood?
the early childhood were movies. A German movie called Metropolis was about the future. It was the first movie that I ever saw about the future. Flash Gordon was nothing. It was just a bunch of drawings with no ideas. Then I heard of H.G. Wells and Leonardo da Vinci, and I was very impressed by them, very impressed by their work. But they had no social designs. Then I read of Plato's Republic, but no detail, and it was designed for the old days. So I said I'd better update all that stuff and see what I can do. Then one day at the aircraft factory when I worked, I was looking at a gear, and the gear had sections sticking out all around. And I thought, gee, that would make a great building. So I drew a building like a gear around, and that was the first concept of a new city. Of course, I did extensions off the gear. The round city seemed to me most efficient because it was the same all along. And then I figured if, instead of an architect designing every building, let's design 1/8 of a system and repeat that design. Then I noticed that in front of factories there was hundreds of automobiles, and they were parked for 8 hours. They weren't used. If only the cars were there, when the people came out, they drove back home with it. Other people took the cars. I figured the millions of automobiles in America can go much further if they weren't sitting in front of a factory for 8 hours. They could be transporting people. Then I noticed that freight yards had a lot of freight trains sitting there, hoping that maybe next month business will be better and they'll use them. And I thought, gee, if only we had a resource-based economy where we'd use all the cars and all the trucks all the time, it would give everybody a much higher standard of living. Instead of making 50 different types of vacuum cleaners, we'd make 5 or so and make them available instead of advertising each vacuum cleaner company. Think of all the duplication. And it seemed to me there were a lot of supermarkets and a lot of stores. There was tailor shops, grocery stores, little stores. And at that time I figured, gee, if we put all those stores in one building, I didn't call it a supermarket, but if all those stores in one building, it'd be easier to shop. So I thought the whole system was loused up with all these separate stores. Then I noticed storekeepers sitting in the store waiting, hoping people came in to buy something. And I figured it was such a waste of time when you can have one big shopping center and then you can buy stuff on a large scale, which is cheaper than each little store buying things. Well, the whole system looked lousy. Going back to school then, the school looked lousy. They were teaching us ancient history, what the early presidential people said. But they didn't teach us about how cruel we were, how we stole land, how we killed the Indians. But I did talk to Seminole Indians, and I found out that we killed a lot of Indians, and I didn't like it. So what I found out about America was true of all countries. They all stole land from one another. Reading Mark Twain, he said, there's probably not an acre of land on earth that belongs to its rightful owner, when you think back in time. And then I began to examine all the other countries briefly. And I said, if all the world could join together and they stopped killing each other, all the wars over all the many years cost an awful lot of money. If you use that money in helping undeveloped countries, it would go much further. So I began to look at all organizations including tech